The booking desk at the 14th precinct smelled like cold coffee and wet floor wax, and Dr. Marcus Ellison stood in front of it with his wrists cuffed behind his back and dried blood stiffening the front of his surgical scrubs. The blood wasn't his. He kept that thought steady in his mind the way he kept steady everything else that mattered. Officer Grant Lawson stood beside him, one hand resting on his duty belt, reciting the charges to the night sergeant like he'd rehearsed them in the car. Grand theft auto, Lawson said. Fleeing on foot, obstruction, resisting, assault on an officer. The sergeant looked up from his screen, glanced at the scrubs, and didn't write anything down yet. Chief Daniel Mercer came through the door 40 seconds later, with his phone already pressed to his ear and his coat still damp from the rain outside. He lowered the phone and looked at Lawson first, not at Marcus. "Did you remove this man from an active operating room?" "He's not a doctor," Lawson said. "He's wearing scrubs because he knew he'd get stopped for the car. That vehicle doesn't belong on a man like that." Mercer didn't answer him right away. He turned his phone so the sergeant and Lawson could both hear it and put the call on speaker. A voice came through, clipped and urgent, the kind of voice that had spent the last 20 minutes talking to people who weren't listening fast enough. "This is Dr. Adrian Pierce at Harborview Regional. I need Dr. Ellison back in operating room 4 immediately. The patient is deteriorating. I can hold him, but not indefinitely." Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Mercer set the phone down on the counter, still connected, and turned to the terminal where the sergeant had finally started running the plate. Lawson should have run 40 minutes earlier. The result came back in under 6 seconds. Registered owner, Dr. Marcus A. Ellison. No theft report on file, no flags, no holds. The plate check had taken less time than it had taken Lawson to walk from his cruiser to the hospital doors. He had simply never asked for it. Mercer stared at the screen a moment longer than he needed to, the way a man stares at a number he already suspects but hasn't wanted to confirm yet. "Uncuff him," he said. Now, 4 hours earlier, none of this had existed yet. Marcus had been sitting on his back porch with a cup of coffee going cold beside him. One of the rare Sunday mornings he actually had off. The kind of morning where the neighborhood was still quiet enough to hear sprinklers ticking on somewhere down the block. When his phone rang with the tone reserved for the hospital's cardiac line, he answered before the second ring finished. "Dr. Ellison, we have an acute aortic dissection in the ED. Stanford type A extending proximally toward the sinus. BP's crashing and there's early tamponade physiology on the echo. Dr. Pierce is prepping the field and getting bypass cannulated, but he wants you leading the repair." Marcus was already standing, already reaching for his keys. "Extending how fast?" "Fast," the voice said. "We need you now." He didn't change out of his sweatpants. He pulled a dark hoodie over his shoulders, grabbed his keys off the counter, and was in the car before the coffee had a chance to go any colder. An aortic dissection meant the inner wall of the body's largest artery had torn, and blood was forcing its way between the layers of the vessel where it was never supposed to go, splitting the wall into a true channel and a false one that competed for the same blood supply. When the tear started close enough to the heart, as this one had, it could cut off flow to the coronary arteries themselves, or let blood pool around the heart until the pressure outside it stopped it from beating at all. Left alone, the vessel could rupture completely within minutes, and once it ruptured, there was almost nothing left for surgery to fix. There was no version of this where Marcus drove the speed limit. Rain had started somewhere over the last hour, fine and steady, turning the road in front of him into a dark ribbon that caught his headlights and threw them back, distorted. The wipers beat a steady rhythm against the windshield, and somewhere underneath the sound of the engine. Marcus was already running the case in his head, the same way he'd run 1,000 cases before it. Clamp position, graft length, how much time the patient actually had left before the math stopped being in anyone's favor. He pulled into the physician emergency bay in his graphite-colored Aston Martin, tires hissing against the wet pavement, and was out of the driver's seat before the engine had fully stopped ticking over. Luis Ramirez was already jogging toward him, hospital badge swinging against his chest, rain darkening the shoulders of his jacket. "I've got it, Dr. Ellison." "Go." Marcus tossed him the keys without breaking stride. "Move it wherever it needs to go. I don't care where." "Already got a spot," Luis called after him, but Marcus was already through the doors. Hood still pulled up against the rain, moving with the particular urgency of a man who had done this exact sprint down this exact hallway more times than he could count and never once gotten used to it. From the far side of the parking lot, Officer Grant Lawson watched all of it happen from inside his parked cruiser. He saw a black man in a dark hoodie step out of a car worth more than most people's houses. He saw that man toss the keys to someone and run, fast, toward the building. He did not see Luis's hospital badge from that distance. He did not see the physician placard clipped to the dashboard. He did not hear the words that had passed between them. What he saw fit a story he already knew how to tell, and he didn't wait for anything else to fill in the details. 13 years on the job had taught him to trust the shape of a situation before he trusted the facts underneath it, and the shape of this one, in his mind, was simple. An expensive car, a man who looked like he didn't belong behind its wheel, and a hurry that read to him like guilt rather than an emergency. He kept dispatch on the line just long enough to say he was checking on a possible stolen vehicle, and he was out of the cruiser and moving before the dispatcher could ask him anything back. "Copy, Unit 14, can you confirm plate or make before?" He had already hung up. Inside Operating Room 4, Marcus was already gowned, gloved, and standing over a patient whose chest was open, whose aorta was tearing wider by the minute, and whose circulation was now running through the bypass machine, humming steadily beside the table, the perfusionist's eyes fixed on the flow numbers scrolling across its display. "Pressure's 90/50 and falling," said Dr. Elena Park from her station near the patient's head, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "He won't hold much longer without repair. Cross clamps on." "Give me the graft," Marcus said, voice even, hands already moving. Cynthia Moore, the scrub nurse who had worked beside him for 9 years, passed the instrument into his palm before he'd finished asking for it. "Field's clean," she said. "Stay with it." The tear ran along the ascending portion of the aorta, close enough to the coronary arteries that a single miscalculated clamp placement could starve the heart itself of blood, even while the surgeons worked to save it. Marcus worked with the particular economy of motion that came from having done this exact repair enough times to know exactly where the danger lived and exactly how little room there was to get it wrong. The room held the particular quiet of a team that trusted each other completely, broken only by the rhythm of the monitors and the low hum of the ventilator. Nobody in that room yet knew what was walking toward them through the front of the hospital. At the reception desk, a young woman looked up to find a police officer leaning over the counter with his jaw set. "I'm looking for a black man, dark hoodie. Just came through here from a sports car in the emergency bay." "That's Dr. Ellison," she said. "He's our chief of cardiothoracic surgery. He just went back for an emergency case. That car isn't a doctor's car. It's his car," she said. "I've checked him in for shifts 100 times. Lawson didn't slow down." Luis caught up to him near the elevator bank, still holding the keys Marcus had handed him minutes earlier. "Officer, he gave me these himself. I can show you exactly where I parked it." Lawson didn't look at the keys. "Anybody can hand off keys," he said, and kept walking. A hospital security guard stepped into his path near the surgical wing doors, hand raised, not aggressive, just firm. "Sir, I can pull his employee file right now. Photo, badge number, department. Give me 30 seconds. "You're obstructing a police investigation," Lawson said. The guard didn't step aside, but he also had no legal ground to physically block a sworn officer who was declaring pursuit of a felony, and he knew it. What he could do, he did. He keyed his radio and called a security supervisor to the surgical wing, then pressed his badge against the reader beside the restricted access doors, only because Lawson was standing close enough that refusing outright meant a physical confrontation the guard had no authority to win. He logged the override the second his hand left the reader, time-stamped, his own name attached to it, so there would be a record of exactly who had opened that door and under what pressure. Rebecca Sloan, the hospital's chief operating officer, arrived at a near run from the administrative wing, having been paged by the front desk the moment the call went out over the same emergency channel the guard had just used. "Officer, I'm asking you to wait right here for a supervisor. I can confirm his identity, his employment, and his vehicle registration in under 2 minutes." "I don't need 2 minutes," Lawson said. "I need you to step aside." Behind Rebecca, a staff coordinator turned a monitor toward him. The hospital's physician directory already pulled up, Marcus's photograph and credentials filling half the screen. "That's him," the coordinator said. "That's Dr. Ellison, right there." Lawson barely glanced at it. He didn't wait for her answer. He pushed past the surgical wing doors, past the sign that read restrained, sterile in 5 beyond this point, and into the anteroom where staff scrubbed in before entering the operating suites. A nurse near the scrub sinks turned at the sound of the door, saw the uniform, and stepped directly into his path. "You cannot come through here without a gown and a mask. This is an active sterile corridor." Behind them, down the hallway, the security supervisor the guard had called finally rounded the corner at a run, radio still crackling in his hand, arriving several seconds too late to do anything but watch Lawson disappear through the inner door. "I need eyes on the man in that room," Lawson said, already moving past her. Through the observation window, he could see a man in a surgical mask standing over an open chest cavity, hands moving with total focus, blood dark against blue drapes. "Get him out here," Lawson said to the nurse stationed at the scrub sink. "He can't leave," she said. "He's mid-repair on a dissecting aorta. If he stops now, the patient dies. That's not my problem." He pushed through the inner door. Cynthia Moore turned the instant the door swung, her voice cutting across the room before Lawson had taken 2 full steps. "Stop, right there. That line on the floor is a sterile boundary, and you are not gowned to cross it." "BP's dropping," Elena said, eyes still on the monitor, voice sharpening. "We do not have room for a disruption right now." Marcus didn't turn around yet. His hands stayed exactly where they were, inside a chest that could not wait for anyone's authority to sort itself out. "Officer, whatever this is, it can wait 90 minutes, Marcus said, calm, steady, not raising his voice. "Run my plate. Call hospital security. Call the administrator standing right behind you. I am not going anywhere until this patient is stable." "You're going to step away from that table," Lawson said. "I am performing emergency surgery," Marcus said. "You are standing in a sterile field without a gown, without a mask, and without any reason to be here that a phone call couldn't have answered 10 minutes ago." Rebecca appeared in the doorway behind him, breathless. "Officer Lawson, this is Dr. Marcus Ellison, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at this hospital. I am telling you, on the hospital's authority, that you need to leave this room right now." "Anybody can say a name," Lawson said. "That doesn't make it true." "It's on his badge," Cynthia said, not looking away from the field. "It's on the door. It's on the schedule board outside this exact room. How many more places do you need to see it written down?" Lawson didn't leave. He crossed the marked line on the floor, closing the distance to the table in 3 steps. "Sir, do not touch him while he's holding an instrument," Cynthia said, her voice climbing now, sharp enough to cut through the room. "You will kill this patient." Lawson reached out and closed his hand around Marcus's forearm as Marcus was repositioning the clamp along the torn vessel wall. The instrument shifted half an inch. It was enough. "Pressure's dropping. 75/40. Elena called out, voice tight. "We're losing ground fast." An alarm on the monitor cut through the room, thin and insistent. "Get off me," Marcus said, low and controlled, not fighting the grip, keeping his other hand steady over the wound. "You are actively endangering this patient's life." "Bleeding's increasing," Cynthia said, already reaching for suction, already compensating for what the interruption had cost them. "Page Dr. Pierce," Marcus said. "Now. Tell him I need him in this room in under 2 minutes." Adrian Pierce came through the scrub room already half-gowned, finishing his gloves as he crossed into the operating suite, moving with the particular speed of a surgeon who understood exactly how much time had just been lost. "Talk to me," Adrian said, stepping into position across from Marcus. Tears at the ascending arch, clamps holding but shifted. "We've lost roughly 200 milliliters in the last 90 seconds. Planned repair is graft placement above the coronary ostia," Marcus said, the words coming fast and exact, no wasted syllables. "I have the field," Adrian said, and took hold of the clamp the instant Marcus released it. Only then, only after Adrian's hands had fully replaced his own, did Lawson pull Marcus back from the table and force his arms behind him. The cuffs closed around his wrists with a sound that seemed far louder than it should have been in a room already full of alarms. Behind them, the surgery continued, Adrian's voice steady, Elena calling numbers, Cynthia's hands never stopping. Lawson walked Marcus out through the hallway in full view of the unit, blood still marking the front of his scrubs, his mask hanging loose around his neck. Nurses stopped where they stood. A visitor near the family waiting area lifted a phone and began recording. A resident froze mid-step with a chart still in his hands. An older man in a wheelchair near the elevator watched the whole procession pass and said nothing, but didn't look away either. Rebecca caught up to them near the elevator, out of breath, furious in the controlled way that came from years of not being allowed to raise her voice in a hospital hallway. "Officer, I am giving you his hospital ID, his employment record, and his vehicle registration right now. Look at any of it. Take it up with my report," Lawson said. "Your suspicion can be checked in under a minute," Rebecca said. "The patient back there cannot recover the minute you're costing him." She held the badge out anyway, walking half a step behind them, her voice not rising but not softening either. "You still have time to stop this before it becomes something neither of us can undo. I am asking you, one more time, to verify before you finish what you've already started." Lawson didn't stop walking. At the station, Lawson told the desk sergeant that Marcus had fled on foot from a stolen vehicle, resisted detention, and struck him during the encounter. Marcus said nothing to argue the point directly. He gave the sergeant exactly what mattered. "My name is Dr. Marcus Ellison. I was removed from an active cardiac operation at Harborview Regional. I need someone to preserve the body camera footage, the hospital security footage, and the operating room log immediately, and I need the hospital called right now to confirm my identity." The desk sergeant looked at the blood on the scrubs, at the hospital ID clipped to Marcus's waistband that nobody had bothered to remove, and didn't need much more convincing than that. He picked up the phone at the counter and dialed the number printed on Marcus's badge himself, without being asked twice. When the plate check came back clean, Lawson's account started to shift. He was acting suspicious, he said, wouldn't identify himself, became aggressive when I approached. "Which is it?" the sergeant asked, not unkindly, just tired. "Stolen car or suspicious behavior? Because those aren't the same charge." Lawson didn't have a clean answer. Chief Daniel Mercer arrived not long after, having already fielded calls from the hospital's general counsel, a city council liaison, and, more quietly, someone identifying themselves as a U.S. Marshals liaison, a detail that told him this had already traveled further than one patrol stop. He didn't raise his voice when he walked in. He asked questions instead, one at a time. "Did you run the plate before entering the hospital?" "No." "Was there a stolen vehicle report on file?" "No." "Did hospital staff identify him as a physician?" "They said they did." "Did you enter the operating room?" Lawson didn't answer that one right away. "Was patient care interrupted?" "I didn't touch the patient." "That's not what I asked you." "Is the body camera preserved?" "It's still recording." "Then it stays on, and it gets pulled the second it's off, before anyone so much as touches the file." Mercer turned to the sergeant. "Get his body camera pulled and locked before anyone touches the footage. Badge, weapon, and terminal access suspended pending review. Get an independent investigator on the phone tonight, not tomorrow." It was somewhere in the middle of that conversation that Mercer learned who the patient actually was. The name on the surgical intake sheet, forwarded to him by hospital counsel, read Nathaniel Price, Chief Judge of the Federal Circuit Court. Lawson's face changed the moment he heard it. The particular fear of a man realizing the ceiling over his head had just gotten much lower. Marcus, still cuffed at the time the name came through, only asked one question. "Is he alive?" "He's alive," Mercer said. "Dr. Pierce is holding him." "Then that's the only thing that matters right now," Marcus said. "His title isn't the emergency. His blood pressure is." Mercer ordered the cuffs removed and arranged an escorted transport back to Harborview, lawful and direct. No theatrics, just speed. Marcus's wrists were photographed before he left the station, red-lined where the cuffs had sat too tight for too long. At the hospital, he didn't stop to explain anything to anyone. He went straight to the scrub room, washed, regowned, and pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, his hands trembling faintly from adrenaline and the ache still radiating from his wrists. He stood still for 3 full seconds, breathing, watching the water run clear over his fingers, before he let himself walk back through the doors. Adrian looked up from the table without stopping his hands. "He's stable, barely. I couldn't finish the graft alone without risking the coronary ostia. Field's yours whenever you're ready." "I'm ready," Marcus said, and stepped back into position. His hands steadied the moment they found the instrument again, muscle memory outrunning the pain. Though for one brief second his fingers hesitated over the suture, a small tremor he pressed flat by sheer will before anyone else could see it. Elena called out numbers as they worked. Cynthia anticipated every next request before Marcus finished asking. The perfusion team held the bypass steady behind them. It took another hour to complete the repair, seal the graft, and confirm flow was restored evenly. Through the vessel, the monitor's rhythm settling from a ragged, uneven blip into something closer to a heartbeat that could be trusted. When the final pressure reading held steady, nobody in the room said anything triumphant. Elena just exhaled long and slow and reached over to silence the alarm that had gone quiet on its own. "Good pressure," she said. "He's going to make it." Because an unmasked officer had crossed the sterile boundary and made direct contact with Marcus mid-repair. Infection Control treated the case as a confirmed breach rather than a theoretical one the moment the patient was closed. The surgical team extended his prophylactic antibiotic course beyond the standard window, sent wound cultures before the incision was even fully dressed, and flagged the chart for daily monitoring rather than the routine post-operative check. Judge Price was told plainly, once he was lucid enough to understand it, that his risk of surgical site infection was now higher than it should have been, and why, and his care team watched for it accordingly. His cultures came back clean, and his wound healed without incident. But nobody on the team treated that outcome as inevitable. It was something they had worked to prevent after the fact, not something they had been guaranteed going in. Marcus stepped back from the table only once the closing team had taken over, and only then did he ask someone to preserve every piece of evidence tied to the last 4 hours. The operating room log, the anesthesia record, the sterile breach report, hospital security footage, the body camera files, the vehicle registration, Luis's statement, and the radio transmissions from Lawson's own dispatch call. Only after all of it had been secured did he let a nurse wrap his wrists. Independent investigator Rachel Monroe was assigned to the case within the week, and she built the timeline the way she built every case, piece by piece, without assuming anything ahead of the evidence. The vehicle registration confirmed ownership. The parking footage showed Luis receiving the keys within seconds of Marcus's arrival. The front desk log showed Marcus's name given twice before Lawson ever reached the surgical wing. The physician directory photo matched him exactly. The body camera footage, once reviewed in full, showed every verification opportunity Lawson had walked past without acknowledging. It also showed something else. His written report, filed hours after the incident, never mentioned the warnings from Cynthia or Elena, never mentioned Rebecca's offer to confirm his identity in under a minute, and listed the charges in an order that changed each time the previous one failed to hold up. grand theft auto giving way to fleeing, fleeing giving way to obstruction, each new word chosen only after the last one had already collapsed under the weight of a 6-second plate check. Monroe's review didn't stop with that single night. She found a complaint, 18 months old, from a black pharmacist stopped by Lawson while loading his own car outside a private clinic. The stop closed without any note of wrongdoing, the pharmacist's own statement at the time, noting that he'd offered his employee badge twice before Lawson would even look at it. She found another, filed by a black medical resident questioned as a trespasser at a staff entrance he'd used for 2 years, a complaint that had been marked resolved after a supervisor accepted Lawson's account without ever pulling the entrance's own security log. And a third, involving a Latino medical courier searched at a hospital loading dock because his sealed containers looked, in Lawson's words, off. A search that turned up nothing but delayed a shipment of donor tissue by nearly 40 minutes. 3 different people, 3 different roles, inside the same kind of building. The same officer each time, deciding that the person in front of him needed to prove he belonged before anything else got checked. Each complaint had been reviewed individually. Each had been closed individually. Nobody had ever placed them side by side until Monroe did. Chief Mercer didn't try to frame it as one officer's failure alone once that pattern surfaced. This was one officer's decision, he said, in the internal review that followed. But it was not one officer's failure alone. We rewarded fast, aggressive stops for years without asking often enough what they cost the people on the other end of them. He said it in front of the review board, on the record, knowing it would follow him the same way it would follow Lawson's file, and he didn't ask anyone to strike it from the transcript afterward. Judge Nathaniel Price recovered steadily over the following weeks, spending the first several days in a quiet ICU room where the only sounds were the soft rhythm of the monitors and the occasional squeak of shoes in the hallway. And once he was well enough to understand the full account of what had happened during his own surgery, he thanked the team personally, one by one, starting with Adrian and ending with the perfusion technician whose name most people never bothered to learn. He did not ask for Lawson's arrest. He recused himself from any legal proceeding connected to the case the moment he learned his own status had played any part in how seriously it was being taken, submitting the recusal in writing before anyone from his office had even suggested it. The law doesn't get more serious because I happened to be the one on the table, he said, in the only public statement he gave about it. It should have been just as serious for whoever else was in that room that morning. The consequences that followed were built entirely on what the evidence supported. Nothing more theatrical than that, and nothing less. Lawson was placed on administrative leave immediately, then terminated once the department's internal review concluded he had breached use of force policy, entry protocol, and reporting standards, all in the same incident. His law enforcement certification was revoked by the state board, closing the door on any return to policing. A civil rights investigation was opened, and prosecutors ultimately filed charges for unlawful detention, reckless endangerment, and filing a false official report. The case built plainly on the timeline Monroe had already assembled. He did not receive a decades-long sentence, and no one in the courtroom asked for one. The judge overseeing the case noted, in handing down a comparatively modest term alongside probation and a permanent bar from any law enforcement role, that the sentence reflected exactly what the record supported, nothing invented to satisfy anyone watching from outside it. A civil suit followed, settled without the city contesting the underlying facts. 2 supervisors who had repeatedly closed prior complaints against Lawson without cross-referencing them faced their own disciplinary review, a quieter but no less real consequence, one of them accepting early retirement rather than sit through the hearing. Harborview conducted its own review in parallel, asking harder questions of itself than it asked of the police department. Why had hospital security been unable to stop an armed officer from entering an active, sterile field? Why had there been no direct emergency channel between hospital leadership and police command for exactly this kind of situation? The answers led to a joint set of reforms between the hospital and the city police department, built specifically around what had gone wrong that morning. Officers responding to a reported vehicle concern were now required to verify plate, ownership, and identity before entering any clinical area, unless an immediate observable threat existed. The hospital established a direct law enforcement liaison position, someone whose entire job was making sure a badge never had to override a 5-minute phone call again, and whose desk sat close enough to the front entrance that no officer would ever again have a reason to say they hadn't known who to ask. Entry into an active operating room now required senior authorization and a documented, observable emergency, not an assumption formed in a parking lot. Any police interruption of ongoing medical care triggered an automatic external review, regardless of outcome. Staff requesting a supervisor's presence gained explicit protection from obstruction charges for making that request. Body camera and hospital security footage were now preserved automatically the moment either agency flagged an incident, rather than depending on someone remembering to ask. Any resisting or obstruction allegation now had to describe specific, observable conduct in writing rather than a general impression, a change aimed directly at the kind of shifting charge sheet that had followed Marcus out of the hospital that morning. Security staff were given a documented override protocol, so no guard would ever again have to make that call alone under pressure at a locked door. A supervisor confirmation was now required before badge access could be granted to any officer disputing hospital identification, with the guard's own safety and the hospital's liability both accounted for in writing. Periodic audits began tracking stops involving luxury vehicles and restricted professional spaces for racial disparities, not to punish individual officers automatically, but to catch a pattern the way this one should have been caught years earlier. None of it was described as a perfect fix, and nobody pretended otherwise. It simply made verification faster than assumption, which was the only thing that had actually been missing that morning. Several months later, another officer received a call about a casually dressed man parking an expensive sedan outside Harborview's emergency entrance and running for the doors. He checked the plate before he got out of his car. He called hospital security before he reached the entrance. Security confirmed within 90 seconds that the man was an emergency medicine physician responding to a mass casualty page. The officer closed the report without ever setting foot past the reception desk and noted in his log the exact times of each call, in case anyone ever needed to check his work the way nobody had bothered to check Lawson's. Marcus was inside at the time, teaching 2 residents how to read an unstable rhythm strip, and he didn't learn about the report at all until it crossed his desk weeks later as part of a routine policy audit. He read it twice, then set it down and went back to the residents waiting for him, because there was still a rhythm strip on the screen that needed explaining, and that, in the end, was the part of the job that never changed. The next person hadn't needed to be a doctor, a judge, or anyone important at all before the facts got checked. They just needed someone willing to check them. Should police officers ever be allowed to enter an active operating room without an immediate observable threat? And should departments be required to reopen old complaints once a clear pattern of profiling comes to light? Tell us where you'd draw the line.